Hello, class. Welcome to this brief lecture on thesis statements. I just want to go over a couple of things that, again, I know you're familiar with, but it's always a good idea to get refamiliarized with them, especially when you are starting a new essay project here. Sorry for that sound, just kind of adjusting my own audio here. So, characteristics of a thesis. The purpose of a thesis statement doesn't really ever change. It, one, clearly lays out your claim or claims, and then it suggests or it details how you will prove that claim. So it's very straightforward, and it is a lengthier and more comprehensive version of what a topic sentence does for a paragraph. A thesis, of course, does for an entire essay. These are characteristics of a good thesis. What makes a good thesis statement does not change either. Clear, arguable, specific, and significant. And the purpose of the text may change, right? And in fact, it does. So you mold the thesis statement to that purpose. And then let's just look real quickly at types of papers that you will find yourself writing, some of them in this class and some in general. A position paper where you identify the position on a controversial topic. I am for immigration reform because, and evaluate, judge the quality of something. This movie was bad because. Proposal, identify a solution to a problem. Summary, response, our paper now. Summarize a text and respond to the main idea or ideas of the texts. Let's talk about some myths of the thesis, because there are many. The thesis statement, first myth, must contain 3 points. Now, that comes from the 5-paragraph structure. When we're in high school, we're in some early college classes, and we're kind of reiterating structure. Teachers are usually very hard about this particular element of the structure, because we really want to nail it in to your memory and make it become second nature. Why? Because for many people aren't going to pursue perhaps a major or go on to a career where they're going to have to write longer than these 5-paragraph essays in their required English classes. So we start there as a basis. That way, years later, they'll remember this and they'll be able to build on it if they go back to school, if they have some kind of a project. You never know when you might need some information. It's not true that, I'll never ever use this. It's just not always certain when you're going to use it or how. I'll tell you, many of the things I wish I had studied more carefully in high school, I don't use in daily life. You know when I needed them, though, quite a bit? When my daughters were getting old enough and were getting into school, and I couldn't help them with homework without doing a lot of research myself, right? And that was really with math, because I'm horrible at math. But it's very important that we hammer in this format. But you have to also understand that having those 3 points in the thesis that correspond to your 3 paragraphs can't always exist. Why? Because you, in this case, is a great example, this summary response paper, you're not writing a 5-paragraph essay. You're going to be writing a possibly, I don't know how many it'll be, 6, could be more, because you're writing a 3 to 4 page paper. And so because of that, because you're not going to just have 3 body paragraphs, you won't have just 3 main points in that thesis, okay? Now, you may also not be able to put all of your main points in the thesis, and so you may have to find a way to do that, but it is a good idea if you can put the points in there, even if they're somewhat broad and you'll have to expand them. It's always a good idea to put your main ideas as much as possible in that thesis statement. And if you can't, then you have to find another way to include them. Don't start writing until you have a thesis. Some teachers will tell you this. Don't start writing until you have the thesis down. The problem with that is that I think for most people, you don't have a clue what the thesis is, because remember, a topic is not a thesis. A statement is different than a topic. A topic's an idea, and a thesis statement is what you're going to say about the idea. All right, and so they're not the same, and so you don't really have anything if you haven't started writing yet. You haven't done any pre-writing. You haven't done any real thought and work on this. Then, of course, you can't just start with a thesis unless you're given a thesis and you have to write a paper to it, which I've never heard of. I'm sure it's possible. So, no, that is not really a good practice. It's better to start with free writing techniques and then arrive at a thesis. We're going to talk about that this week. You're going to do that for this paper. You're going to do a little free writing exercise. That way, we really loosen up the ideas. We explore the ideas in a context where there isn't really a whole lot at stake. You can't really give an objective grading and value to pre-writing unless somebody just doesn't do it at all, and so or they don't develop ideas. And so as a result of that, that is the safe place to really expand the ideas, really explore them, and then you begin, only then, coming towards a conclusion that is a thesis, right? Because a thesis is a concluded idea, and it may change as you're writing the paper. That's certainly okay, but the kernel of it will be there, and you're not going to get that kernel until you do some digging. And I use this example in my reading and writing English class. I told my students there, and it's a great thing to remind you of as well, that no product that we are familiar with in our daily lives, look around your desk or wherever you are right now, nothing around you came to be instantaneously. Any product you can think of, the mouse, your laptop, your device, your cell phone, whatever it might be, a pencil, it had a stage that went through trial and error design, that went through exploration, and then arrived at that final design, that final form. It's a product, and that is the same with writing, right? So you are doing pre-production, if we use film terminology. You're in the pre-production phase right now. You're working on what you're going to do when you produce your paper. And so you can't just say, I'm going to just wait and stop, not going to even start writing until I have a thesis. No way that's really possible. Don't refuse to change your thesis if the paper evolves as you write, especially with a topic like this one, because as you explore it more, as you maybe have already started some of this, and then you're in the discussion board and you're looking at certain things, you're watching my video on the allegory, and you're thinking, oh, I didn't think of that. Be open, be flexible. And that is, again, when we're trying to hammer home the idea of formatting and the idea of structure, we sometimes teachers will be a little too hard on that, but now that you're at this stage of writing, absolutely be flexible enough to make that thesis change as your ideas change. However, some people get locked into a thesis and they know that's their thesis. I was always like that. And I remember a time when I was in high school and college where we didn't have the resources that you guys have today. And so we would have to go to a library, get a physical book. We would have to then write down all the citation information on note cards. And our teacher often really required us to hand in our quotes fully quoted on those cards, and the cards then we used and arranged them in the paper however we needed them. We had to hand that in as part of the pre-writing. How things have changed. I'm sure you're very glad to know you won't have to be mailing me any cards, note cards, right? So it may be, and for me it was, once I did that process and I really looked at all of my quotes and really did some pre-writing, I got a thesis. It rarely changed, not because my ideas didn't change, but because I spent a lot of the time I would spend in writing and thinking in pre-writing. Some people didn't have that experience, but that's always been mine. That is not to say mine is right and that yours is wrong and vice versa. If you are locked in, you know exactly what your thesis is, then absolutely go for it. But it's just to know that you don't have to be locked into it, and to give you the permission to go ahead and make changes as necessary. The thesis is not the first sentence of an essay. This seems to be a confusion, I think, that comes about and I can remember my high school students always telling me, oh, Mr. Moe, that's wrong, because I had a teacher that told me the thesis has to start your essay. Well, I think really it wasn't the teacher. I think this student probably got confused. If you're writing a paragraph, of course, you're going to start it with the topic sentence. It tells us, it forecasts what the paragraph is going to be about. But if I'm writing an essay, that thesis sentence, not a topic sentence, is going to be the last sentence of the first paragraph. Now, that's a generalization. Why? Because, for example, when I was in grad school, my first grad program that I started, and then before I switched to education, I had to write a 30-page paper. I could not possibly provide context, which is what the thesis does. I could not possibly provide context in one paragraph. So there's no way my thesis could be the last sentence of the first paragraph. In fact, it was probably the third paragraph. So it's a hard and fast rule when we're talking about structure, when you're doing that 3-paragraph essay. However, that is wrong for a 3-paragraph essay. Anytime I'm doing something longer than a paragraph, my students in my other class right now are writing a paragraph first, and they're getting into the structure of that. So their topic sentence, first sentence of the paragraph. For an essay of any length, usually, depending again for this one, 3 to 4 pages, right? Last sentence of that first paragraph, that's where I want to see the thesis, and that's where it should be. And it just, again, depends on the length and the purpose of the paper. Here are some common thesis mistakes. No defensible or clear claim using pros and cons instead of specific positions. Cars are really great because they help us to get places faster than it would if we could walk. Well, that would get a position going. Really, why? Beyond that, really defend a position. And that is also something that everybody would agree with. Yeah, you're right. Okay, we're done. There's nothing more to talk about. Multiple claims that are not defensible. Tomorrow morning, the sun will rise in the east. Okay, the end. It's a sentence. That's not an idea. It's not a thesis, and it's not a paper. Having a thesis that's too broad can be very problematic, and you want to avoid that too. In this paper, you may have that problem because it depends on what you're going to do in your response to the allegory of the cave. So you want to be careful with that. Universally agreed upon factor observation, that's what I was giving an example of there. It doesn't require defense. Most people agree. Having a thesis that's a question while asking yourself questions is a great pre-writing strategy. I don't understand this. When you're annotating, I don't know what they're saying. Write out, I don't understand this. Write out specifically that thing you don't understand. Fantastic. It's a good way also to create an early form of your thesis. It can be a question. It is a thesis statement for a reason. You're making a statement and defending a statement. You're not defending a question because a question can't be defended. Now, where is a great place for a question? We talked about that in the other video. In your introduction, ask a question at the beginning in the intro, answer it in the conclusion, or answer it throughout the paper, and then reiterate that you're answering it throughout the paper, and again in the conclusion. Great strategy. A thesis is a statement. You can turn a question into a thesis, though, by adding an answer. And so maybe if you're struggling with a thesis, maybe you have a question, and you go, oh, if I rewrite this and I have an answer for it, bam, hello, thesis. Thesis statement anatomy. You have a topic, claim, and preview. All right, that's kind of the three parts. The topic is the what, the claim is so what, and the preview groundwork for the answer to so what. So there's an overarching argument can be used if there are more than 3 points, right? I talked about that earlier, that you may have 12 points. Well, you're not going to put 12 of them in your thesis. You may, however, be able to in some way encapsulate 12 points in 2 sentences, right, or 1 sentence. And this is another thing I didn't put in the myths, that you have to, a thesis really should be 1 sentence. It really should be for this particular exercise. Sometimes for a longer project, it can be more than 1. This one, we want to stick to that. And I like that especially because it challenges you to not really get lazy with writing. And the harder you have to work to really be concise and specific is only going to make you a stronger writer. Of course, if you are a grad student in an English, pursuing your master's in let's say, I don't know, romantic poetry or literature, well, you're probably going to be able to have more than 1 sentence because you might be writing a 30, 40, or longer. You might be writing a doctoral thesis. Then, of course, that's not going to be possible. Summary response thesis statements. These are some basics here. These thesis statements will follow the same rules of other essays. Clearly identify the claim, make sure that it is arguable, specific, and it's significant. Then the purpose of the summary response essay is to present the main idea or ideas of a text and then respond. You want to present that in miniature form for this essay in your thesis. Tell us what those ideas are, what you think about them, preview them in miniature. Thesis statements should indicate which text you're summarizing, so you want to mention Plato's allegory of the cave and present your claims about the text, your response. You're not putting all of your response because you couldn't fit that in 1 sentence, but you're forecasting it, you're previewing it, right? Isn't it frustrating? This bothers me. Local news. I turn on the local news in the morning and I want to get to know what the day's forecast. We'll have the full forecast in the next 10 minutes, coming up every on the 3s, and I'm sitting there going, I don't have time for the next 3. If it's 6:03 and I have to leave, I can't wait till 6:13. But that's what you're doing. You're giving a little taste of your paper. You're forecasting it with the idea, and that's why they do that too, to keep you watching. Same method here, same approach here. Keep people reading. Here are some sample thesis patterns. I agree with the main ideas because I disagree with the main ideas because I agree with some of the main ideas and disagree with other main ideas because I agree with this idea, these ideas because, but disagree with these. Remember, it's okay to be conflicted. Although the author makes a good point when they claim, and whatever that claim they're making, the idea or ideas, I don't believe their claim, idea because. I like authors' name ideas about ideas because, but I have a hard time believing idea because. What I like most about name of text, right, Allegory of the Cave, is idea. or ideas. Stick with whatever your thesis idea states. Once it states that, that's kind of your, and what's great about a thesis, when we write it very clearly, very concisely, it always is our touchstone. We go back to that thesis and go, oh yeah, this is what I need to talk about next. Talked about that, gotta talk about this, talk about that, talk about this. And that is one of the reasons this structure is so important, and why this structure is not new, has been around almost as long, perhaps, as has been the allegory of the cave. Your body should reflect what's previewed in the thesis. And that's it for the thesis. If you have any other questions, please let me know about this. There will be another video coming that will get into just some basic overview ideas of the allegory of the cave to kind of solidify some things for you in case you aren't sure about some things. Hopefully you're having, in our discussion, you're really getting questions answered that other students are probably asking your questions, and you're answering some of theirs. That's the wonderful back and forth, give and take that we have in the discussion process.